Welcome to this new series I like to call Learning React. And today in this series, in this episode, we're going to be learning React by building a project, a very simple project, a to-do app. Now, there might be millions of other tutorials as well that build a to-do app using React, but know, here it's not just about building the app, but also going through my basic workflow of what I do when I create a new app, create a new project, and how I set up my workspace, stuff like that. So yeah, let's just get right onto it. You can see here on my screen, I have my terminal open, and usually that's always open. I hope you can read what's written. I've increased the font size a bit. I'm also going to open up my browser. Don't judge me because I'm using Safari. Also going to open up another window of the browser. This is just going to be purely for Googling stuff because we're going to be Googling a lot of stuff. I mean, at least I do whenever I work on something new. The next thing that we're going to have is VS Code open. So again, you can use things like WebStorm or anything like that, but I know it's just going to be simple. So I hope you can read the text here as well. It's all increased. Awesome. So that's how it's going to be. I'm going to close VS Code for now because we don't have our project running. So now let's create a project. First, I'm going to go to NextJS. So NextJS, I chose to use this because for almost all of my projects, mainly because most apps that I create would have these basic functions like routing, moving multiple pages. I really like TypeScript in certain of my projects. And Next.js has all of them. Next.js just has all of them without having to implement the tooling for them from scratch. And that sort of speeds up my workflow. And it's great to start using it from scratch. So yeah, I'm just going to click on Start Learning. And looks like this is how I would create a next app. I would say npx create next app and the name of the app. And I would also suggest that you go through the same steps, go to Google, search the framework that you're looking for, go to the documentation and look up, how you would create a new project. Because today it's like this, tomorrow it might be a whole different, tooling chain. So yeah, right now we're going to use npx create next app. Let's do that. First, I'm going to go to my projects folder and I'm going to go to the Learning React folder as well. And here I'm going to create the new project, npx create next app, and I'm going to call it to-do app. All right, that's done. Awesome. Now I can just go into the app, cd to-do app, and open up VS Code. That's cool. All right. And also I'm going to run up the server. So npm run dev. All right. So the server starting up at localhost 3000. I'm just going to click on that. And you can see down here below, you have the starting page for Next.js. So that's sort of it for setting up the next project. Now we're actually going to strip whatever we have with the next project and remove all of the styles, remove all the text, so that all we have is basic HTML code, no styles, all of that. So just gonna go to styles and remove this home.module. We don't need that. We don't need anything in globals.css. Say bye-bye to that. We don't need the API folder as well. Let's remove that. Not much to change in app.js. Just gonna add semicolons and all of that. And in index.js, I'm just gonna remove all the imports, remove everything inside the return statement, and just return hello world. Awesome. So we've stripped down everything, and this is what it looks like. Just because I like to, I'm also going to convert all of these to anonymous functions, just because I like anonymous functions. So const home, and finally export default home. Awesome. So now we have that set up. Now what we're gonna do is basically add the libraries that we might use. Now, the next step I would usually do is integrate Tailwind or something like that. There are multiple CSS libraries out there. You can use Bootstrap, Ant Design, many others. but I've sort of recently gotten a liking to Tailwind, so I'm just going to integrate that. So I'm just going to Google Tailwind CSS and Next.js, and the first link is going to tell me how I'm supposed to integrate Tailwind into Next.js. So looks like this is what I would have to install. Let's install that. Open up a new tab and add this. After that, I need to create the configuration files. So just need to run this command right here, npx tailwind init. All right. All right. So it looks like it created two files, tailwind.config.js and postcss.config.js. Cool. Okay. What's my next step? I'm supposed to add this purge. So basically, this is an optional step that is good to do. It's expected you as a developer. So what this is going to do is basically look through pages, and if you have a folder called components, which we could if we want to, and just keep the CSS classes from Tailwind that we actually use and remove the ones that we don't. This results in a shorter file size in our production app. That's what this is all about. Again, there's great rating on optimizing for production right there. The next thing that we need to do is basically add the Tailwind classes. So what I'm going to do is create a file called tailwind.css in my styles folder, add the Tailwind classes. And you also notice that you get these warnings. We can easily turn off these warnings by going to VS Code preferences, open up the workspace settings, and disable CSS validate. So we won't actually be needing this. All we need is, Tailwind and VS Code just don't get along well. So that's why we're going to be removing that. Now we have that. Let's also make sure to include tailwind.css into our app.js. So we just above globals where we've imported globals, where it's also at tailwind.css. Awesome. So we should be done with everything. Now I think we can make use of some Tailwind classes. Let me just do class name text XL or like 4XL. So that's basically going to increase my font size. But I'm refreshing, but it doesn't look like it actually worked. And that's because we've added Pepback and all of that, we need to turn down our server and run it up again. So, okay, running npm run dev, refreshing. It's going to take a short while because it's building Tailwind for the first time, and looks like it works. The font size is also increased. So that's about it for setting up the Tailwind library with Next and getting you started. Now, what I'd like to do is basically not have styles at the start, but essentially keep all the styling to the end and just work on basic HTML, then React, and then styling. This sort of helps you as a developer understand that HTML and the layout structure, the syntax that it reserves, you get to work on that first so that you get proper syntax, and then you can work your way up. So you'll see what I mean by in a second. So I'm just gonna remove all the styles. I've commented out tailwind.css for now. So we basically are back to square one where we don't have any styles at all. Now what I'm gonna do is go back to my index.js where I can start writing my HTML code. So how would I want my website to look like? I basically want a h1 tag, h1, and let's call it to-do app. All right. I would also maybe want an input tag, an input text field with a button. So I'm just going to put them into a div and call input, type text. All right. And yeah, let's add the button as well. Button, and it's supposed to be type button. Again, these are just basic stuff. I'm going to call the button add. Looks like we have that. We have a text box right here where you can type stuff. And when you click on add, obviously it doesn't do anything. Finally, we're also going to have a UL on unordered list, and inside that UL an li with list item. Actually, we'll just say buy milk, buy eggs, 2x. All right, so something like this, and yeah, that's all it. So this is our basic structure of how our to-do app is going to look like. You could make some decisions here on how you would want to handle individual actions. So what I've thought of is basically when I click on any particular item inside the to-do list, it's supposed to be crossed out and sent to the bottom of the list. So that way you don't actually have to have buttons across each item anything like that. So that's the idea right here. What it's going to look like sort of is basically when you surround this with an S tag. Yeah, that's sort of what I'm trying to go for. We'll have uh, basically the item that's struck out. When you click on it, that basically means it's done. So let's remove that for now. Now let's actually get into the React part of it. We're all done with the HTML part. Let's actually dive into using stuff in React. So what I'm going to do here to manage this to-do list is quite simple. Just going to use state. Now the use state hook is just one of the ways that you can do this. You can also use something called use reducer and maintain like a much more complex level of state. You can also use something like mobx, redux, or anything like that to maintain the state. But for this example, it's overkill, to be honest. You can use something like useState and get your job done. So we might, make use of the other state management tools and some other tutorials. So here, I'm just going to use state. Use state returns two items inside an array. And the two items, you can name them however you want. One of them is the actual value, and one of them is a setter value, a setter function. You can basically use that to set the value of the first value. So what we're going to do, we're going to call this items and set items. So items is going to hold the entire array of items that we have, the to-do items that we have. Set items is a function that's returned by useState to set the value of items. When you're using useState, you never update the value of items directly. So it's wrong basically to do something like items equals this array. So you're not supposed to do that. So that's why we use set items. useState takes one parameter. Again, you don't need, it's an optional parameter. When you don't pass anything, it's set to undefined. But here I don't want it to be undefined. I want it to be an empty array. Awesome. So now I'm going to fill this array with, let's say, things like buy milk and buy 2 eggs. Let me just add one more, maybe buy PlayStation 5. If you can get your hands on one. All right, so I have 3 items in my items list. And now going down to my UL, I'm going to remove all the li tags that we have and map over the items. So items.map, I'm going to get each individual item. And notice how I'm using the regular braces and not curly braces right here. If I use curly braces, I would have to return each individual item like this. But instead, what we can do is directly return using the regular type of braces. So now I can enter HTML or JSX directly. So I'm just going to say li, and here inside the curly braces, I'm just going to say item. So it's going to, now you can see the HTML right here. It's basically looping over each item and printing what's in the list. And this is going to be dynamic. If I add items to items, if I add an individual item inside items, it's going to update it here as well. So that's why we did this. Also, you need to have a key property that's expected of you from React. If you check the console right here, you might get an error saying, each child in a list should have a unique key prop. And that's basically saying that each item that is just adjacent to what's being returned by map, it's supposed to have a key property. And key usually is supposed to be unique. That's what they ask. Here, it's fine. We don't have any other value. We're going to make use of item itself as the key. But soon we'll need some sort of ID, and we'll work on that later. So just going to refresh this for now, and yeah, looks like we don't have any errors. Console looks clean, and it still works. Now we're actually going to work on adding, typing stuff right here and adding it to the list. So let's create a new state variable. Let's call it to do item and set to do item, and return this from your state. So this is going to be an empty string. This is basically going to hold our whatever we type right here. If I say buy bread, now this is the value that's going to be inside to do item. So let's work on that. First, I'm going to set the value of the input tag. So that's going to be to do item. The value of input is going to be to do item. And also on change, which is basically an event listener for every input tag. This is going to give you an event, And with this event, you can say e.target.value. So e.target.value is going to contain whatever character or whatever string that you type. So this is the value that we need. We're simply going to set to do item to that value. So now all that's done. Let me just refresh. And when we start typing, it's actually all the value that I'm entering is going to be stored into to do item. And it's also important to verify this. So what we're going to do is a simple debugging step where I'm going to add another li at the bottom and also add to do item right here. So now we see this empty item right here. I'm going to type, and we have verified that it's actually being stored into state and there are no issues. Awesome. It's an important step to always verify each individual step that you do. If you're unsure, just to know that you're going in the right step, right? Awesome. So now let's actually work on adding it to the items list. So I'm going to create a function to map to our add button right here. I'm going to call it handle add. And this function is basically going to set items. Now, set items, like we said, it's supposed to take an instance. We're going to set the value of items right here. So what I'm going to do is give it an array. I'm going to use the spread operator and call items. This basically means I'm duplicating the items array. Now, whenever you use the spread operator, it basically means that you want to create a copy, an exact copy of the object that you want with all the items. You're pulling all of the items and creating a new array or creating a new object out of it, but you're not modifying the original array or original object. And that's very important because like I said in the start, we shouldn't be modifying items directly. Instead, we should be using set items. So what we're doing here is essentially pull all of the items inside the items array, and now we can add additional items. So I'm just going to say to do item. So after we've pulled all of the items from the original items array, in the end, we're going to add to do item. You can also do something like this, where you add to do item at the start and then spread everything else. So that way, whatever you add is always going to be at the top of the list. That actually makes sense for a to-do list that we add the latest stuff on the top. So let's do that instead. So let's just map, we got a handle add. Let's just map it to our on click of the button. And yeah, I think that should be done. Now let me just test this out. Let's say buy bread and click on add, and it's added to the top of the array. All right, now all that's done. We notice that once we still type buy bread and click on the add button, we still see the text is still visible. I can click on this multiple times, and I'm gonna get an error saying the same key was used. And there's some other issues that when you remove, when you have no text and you just click on add, you're still going to get that error. So this is not how it's supposed to be done. So let's fix these issues. Firstly, let's remove the text once we're done entering the item. So set to do item and set to do item to an empty string. What this is going to do is once you've added to do item to the list of items, the main array, we're going to clear out whatever text that we have. So let's test this out. When I say buy bread and click on add, it's going to clear out the string right here. Now to fix the issue with adding empty items, we're just going to check if to do item. So if to do item, this check is basically going to check if to do item is truthy or falsy. Now, when you run if and an empty string, it basically means it's a falsy string. An empty string equates to false. Similar to when you run 0 or something like that, it's going to return false. So this, whatever we put inside this is never going to run if to do item is empty. So that's what we're going to do here. If to do item, set to do items and set to do item to empty. Now, when we refresh this, I'm just going to say buy bread to verify that it's working. It is. Now I'm clicking add without having added anything, and looks like it's working. Now we're actually going to go to the next step and work on toggling whether a certain item is done or not. So for this, we can't make use of just what we have. We can't make use of simple strings. We have to store a lot more information for each individual to-do item that we have. And this is the same for most real world use cases where you're not just going to store a single string or a single number or something like that. You're going to store an entire record of information around it. So I'm just going to remove all of these and define our schema right here. I'm going to say it's supposed to, let's say each item is going to have an ID, and it's supposed to have a message as well. Let's say buy milk is one message, and I'm going to have a property or a variable called done to determine whether the item, that to do item is done or not. So I'm just gonna set it to false for now, because eventually it's not going to be false, and you can ignore the error for now. That's all right. What's happening is we're trying to print, or we're trying to display an object, and we're always supposed to be displaying strings or numbers in React. So now let's go down to our items.map, and here I'm going to destructure the item that we have. Now we know that item is an object. Each item is an object, and in this it contains ID, and you can actually take a look at the autocomplete right here. You have suggestions that you have ID and message. So let's make use of the ID as the key. This is how it's supposed to be. And for the text inside, let's use message. And looks like it's working. Buy milk works. Now when I try to add something, we're actually going to run into an issue, because to do item still takes it as a string. You're just adding individual strings. You're actually supposed to be adding an object instead. So what we're doing here is going to convert this to do item into an object. And this object is going to have an ID. Again, let's just keep work on the ID for now. The message is going to be to do item, and done is going to be false, because at the start, when you're adding new items into the to-do list, you're not actually going to have done them. Now we're going to run into an issue again, because the ID is similar for every item that we add. We would need a situation, we would need a scenario where each time we add a new item into the to-do list, we need a special random ID. So what I'm going to make use of here is a neat little library called UUID. So let's actually make Google UUID npm. And this library is, again, industry standard. We make use of UUID to generate this sort of string, an object ID or a user ID, sort of like that. So this is how you would use it. You'd install npm install UUID and import it this way. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We've added it. Let's import from UUID. And inside this v4, we have multiple versions of them. Just going to say v4 as UUID v4. And this is basically a renaming step. We don't want to call it u4, but we want to call it UUID v4. Now, instead of setting ID 1, 2, 3 here, I'm just going to say UUID v4. So this function is going to return a string, as we see here. That's exactly what we want. Yeah, we want our ID to be a string. And yeah, that's sort of it. Let me just refresh this once again and just say buy bread and click on add, and yeah, it's working as expected. I can also add buy PS5, or I can add buy bread again, and you notice that the key issue doesn't exist anymore, and this is because each of them have their own individual ID. I'm just gonna print the ID, and you can look right here. The ID sort of looks something like this. So we have two items of buy bread, but each item has its own individual object ID. And the reason for using UUID is that the chances of it repeating the exact same string repeating for each object is very, very low, almost impossible. So that's why we tend to use UUID. So yeah, that's sort of it for the React side of it. Now, yeah, let's start working on the actual done click handling the toggle. So right, I'm going to create a new function called handle toggle. And this handle toggle function is going to expect an ID. We're going to work on the ID. Now with the ID, what I'm going to do is basically look through each item inside items, items.map. Again, I'm going to get item here, each individual item. And I'm going to return item, just return item. So what this is basically what it's going to do, it's returning an array. I mean, it's similar to this step right here, what we did using the spread operator in items, we're essentially going to duplicate the item array. And let's actually add this into a variable. Let's call it underscore items. And again, this is a pretty common practice when you have items or variables that are similar to, or what you're doing is basically duplicating items right here, but you can't call them items because you'd have a clash of variable names and it gets confusing. So it's good to just add an underscore right in front of them and make use of that. So now I can call set items underscore items. So yeah, this is working just right. Now we need to actually write the code to toggle each item. So what this is going to return each item, right? Inside this, I'm going to check if item.id equals the ID that I have passed down right here. So if it's the same ID, that means I want to toggle that particular item. So I'm going to return not just item, but spread operator item. So what I'm doing here is instead, previously we duplicated an entire array. So we use the array brackets and all of that. Here, we're going to duplicate the object. We're going to duplicate the item object. So that's why we've returned an object with a spread operator item. And now we can change individual properties. So what this is going to do is basically return everything that's here, including done, but here we're overwriting the value of done. So what I'm going to do is invert item.done. So whatever value that I have, whatever ID that I pass to handle toggle, it's going to go through each individual item. It's going to select the item that I clicked and going to switch the value of done from false to true, or if it was true, it will be it would change it to false. So that's what's happening in this little step right here, and it wouldn't go further here because we'd return it right here, right? Yeah, that's about it for this step. Let's now actually map handle toggle to the on click of individual items. So on click. Now I can't use something like on click handle toggle directly. It wouldn't work because handle toggle is expecting an ID and I need to pass that ID. So let's create an anonymous function right here and pass ID. And we can use ID like this because we've destructured our item right here. If we were to have something like this, we would simply change all of these to item.id, something like that. But we have ES6 options, we can destructure, so we should. Now we can simply click on individual items and you can actually notice that they are being made into done, but we don't actually see them because we don't have any visual indicators for the same. Now we're actually going to make use of the done property and determine whether a particular item is done or not. So for this, I'm going to make use of a little CSS property. I'm going to create a class called done and call text decoration line through. So this is going to mimic the whole strike through or the S tag that we used earlier. So now whenever a value or whenever a to-do item has the value of done to be true, we're going to make sure that this class is being applied. So let me just pull down done from the destructuring array and destruction object. I'm going to use class name, and inside class name, now I would have to write some string like this, determine whether done is true or false, and something like that. So let's instead of that, I want to do something much more simpler, something that will scale. So I would want to use a library called class names. Now again, class names is a really cool library. Let me just Google that right here, class names npm. So this is a simple utility function that allows you to add multiple class names into a function, and this would essentially return you a string that React needs. So you can get really creative with this. You can write math to actually make your class names appear and disappear. But here we're going to basically use something like this, where the value of the done value is dependent on the done boolean right here. So we've installed npm I class names. Now let's actually import it. Import from class names, and you can actually call this whatever you want. People usually just call this class names. I'd like to call it CX. That's also a pretty cool industry standard. Mainly because CX is short and you want to aim for shorter code. So CX, And here I'm gonna call item. So item is going to be just one individual item right here. So every item is going to have this base class, and also create an object called done. So what this is going to do is basically uh, if the value of done is true, or then the value of the string done is going to be applied to this class, applied to this li tag. So since we're destructuring stuff, we can use ES6 syntax and just make this into one single variable done. That's mainly because we have both of them as the same variable name. If we were to name this something else, it would not work. Awesome. So this should be good. Now when I try to click on a particular item, I'm clicking on buy milk, it toggles on and it's struck through. And when I click on it again, it's gone. So that means it's working. I'm just going to create a new one, let's say buy bread, and click on it. It works perfectly. Awesome. Now, one thing that I would want to do is, not just keep it like this. I would want to split all of my done items, all of the items that are not yet done to the top, and all of the items that are done to the bottom. So what we can do is basically copy paste the entire items.map that we have right here. So we basically would have two items right here, two set of lists right here. And here I'm going to filter the value of each individual item. I'm going to get individual item and going to determine whether the item is done or not. So again, we can use some destructuring here. I just need the value of done. So if the value is not done, then we're going to display this. Just going to copy this filter right here, add it here. And if the value in this array, in this set, we're going to only filter out the values that are done. So we won't have anything. So now when I simply click on buy bread, it's going to get pushed to the bottom. If I click on buy milk, that's going to get pushed to the bottom as well. When I unclick buy milk, it's going to get pushed to the first list right here. So we've mimicked the entire system of having only done items at the bottom and undone items at the top. All right, this looks like our basic functionality of the entire app is almost done. All we need to do now is actually work on the styling. And this is honestly by far my favorite part. So let me just bring in Tailwind again. Let me go to app.js and uncomment tailwind.css. And it looks like we might have to, okay, yeah, it works. Now this Tailwind, it basically has something called a reset CSS. It's going to reset all of the values, all of the styling that you would usually have, and have just, even input tags, input boxes would not have borders or anything like that. So we're going to work with this from scratch. I'm thinking, our app is going to have some sort of dark mode-ish look. So I'm just going to go to underscore app and we have our component. We're going to surround this component with a div. Let me create a div right here, surround it. And this div is going to have a class of screen. Now, again, this is Tailwind. You don't need to actually go into CSS to write CSS. You have all of these utility functions for you to help. So screen is basically height 100 VH. It's going to set the height of the screen, height of the div to whatever is the height of the screen or the viewport. So I have height screen, and I'm also going to make BG gray 900. So this is going to basically make my background dark. I'm also going to say text inside text gray 100, and this is going to make all my text bright. So I have like an inverse thing going on there. Also, I think I can, I can be done with this right here. Let me just go into index.js now and work on the styling here. So right off the bat, I think I want my entire website to have, have some border on the side, some empty spacing on the side. So I'm going to say width 3/4. So this is basically translated to width 75%. So it's only going to use 75% of the screen and also use MX Auto. So it's going to center it. So this portion right here that you see in the left and also on the right would essentially be some sort of padding. So that's cool. I'm also going to add a text center. So all of the text is centered throughout the app. Awesome. And yeah, that should be it. Now what I'm gonna do is add a class called to the h1 tag. I'm going to add a class text for Excel. So this is basically going to increase my font size to 2.25 rem. Maybe I can work with 5XL. Looks better. If you want to increase font size, you use something like this. Again, Tailwind, it's not really that hard. You can just go to tailwind.css and search for things like font size, let's say. And you have amazing documentation on how to increase font size, what to use for what size, things like font style, font weight. Basically, with Tailwind, you never, I mean, not never say never, but you would rarely have to go into actual CSS to write code. You can add all of the classes here. And again, a lot of cool features that we haven't even begun to work on, but this is sort of the surface. Now I'm also going to add maybe a h6 tag and call this learning React. So this is going to be right on top of To-Do app. And let's add a class name of text XS, which is like extra small, and also a class of uppercase. So yeah, and maybe I can make it bold as well. So just on top of this like heading. Now I'm gonna surround this with a div because this is one entire section. So say and add some padding on the top right here. So PT12. So where this is essentially padding top 3 rem or 48 pixels. Now I want to do this similar thing here. I want to add some padding to the input box. So at PT12 at the top here. So we have some spacing here. And it looks like this is a good time to maybe look at some fonts, maybe change fonts. So I'm going to go to fonts.google, and now this is always the hardest part. I take hours trying to pick a font, but no, I've already made up my mind here. I'm going to use Poppins. Well, maybe. So I'm just going to pick the regular font right here, select the style, and import using this. So I'm going to get this import file, import line right here, go to my globals, add it at the top, and that's not all. We need to also apply this style. So just going to say HTML body means applying it across the page and apply Poppins to all the text in our page. And yeah, it looks pretty good actually, especially with the learning React. Now I'm also going to add some padding bottom to the learning React thing because I think it's sticking a bit too much to it. All right. Now let's get on to styling our input box. So our input box looks, we can type stuff, but we don't actually see it because the text inside is also white. So let's start by fixing that. Class name, text gray 900. Now we can actually see what's being written. Let's add some padding as well. So px4, that's padding on the left and right by 1 rem, and py2, which is basically half a rem of padding top and bottom in the y-axis. Now when we look at this, so we have some clean writing right here. I could also use something like text center, and whatever I enter would be centered. So what I'm thinking is, I think we can actually forgo this entire button right here and just keep the text box. And whenever I click on enter, this is going to add it to my list. So let's actually work on doing that. But first, let's actually style this a bit more. I want to also edit rounded corners. Awesome. And also make sure it goes to full length. So W full is going to is basically with 100% so that it spans to the entire height width. Awesome. Now let's actually work on doing the enter thing. Gonna click on gonna type on key down. On key down is going to give you an event, a keyboard event, and with this keyword event, you can basically do stuff when a user clicks on a particular key inside the keyboard. So you can get this by getting the event or key. So it's you can also use something like key code, but that's deprecated now as it's seen here and deprecated. So you can use something like key to get this value. So right now I'm just going to console log key right here whenever we enter. So now with our console open, I'm just going to start typing, and you can see here that we have all this text S, D, B, N, J, all of that being added. Now when I click on enter, we also see enter being stored. So this is what we're going to be using. So I'm just going to create a new function called handle enter. And this function is expecting an event. So we got that event. So if the event dot key, as we saw, is enter, then we want to handle add. So let's just map this handle enter into our on key down property, and this should be done. So I can now simply say buy bread, hit enter, and it would add it to my list. I can say buy PS5, and it would add it to my list. So that's about it there. Let's continue with our styling with adding some padding top to the UL class right here, PT12. Awesome. Now we're actually going to work on styling the individual item. So for this, I've decided that I'm just going to succumb to this and go to my CSS and add it. So another cool thing with using NextJS is you can use something called CSS modules. So now I'm going to create a file called home.module.css. What this is going to do is I'm going to create an style called item, a class called item, and an item class called item.done. This is basically a way of writing if you have the class item and also the class done in the same element. So then you would use this. So we have these. Now I'm going to import this style to my file. I'm just gonna direct find this file. It's in the styles folder, home.module.css. So now this is a neat way of getting styles. I'm just gonna console log the styles property so I can explain this better. So the styles property basically has an object. It's an object with the item property and a done property. So item is going to have a string, and it's a randomized string, home item QMB6F. And done has a string of home done B3I. I mean, it doesn't matter. It's completely random. So this is another industry standard way of getting styles and scoping them to an individual component or an individual page. So whatever styles that you enter in this CSS file right here, they would only be used within this component. Whenever you add like background color or something like that, it would not affect any other item class inside another component and would be limited scoped to just this component, and that's necessary for us in some cases. So what I'm going to do here, our styles property returns item and done. So here I'm just going to call this, instead of passing item here, I'm just going to say styles.item. Similar to the one below, I'm going to call styles.item. And for done, now I'm going to bring back this syntax right here. So whenever done is true or false, I wanted to return styles.done. Similar to the bottom, I would want styles.done. Actually, we would not even require this. We would just have styles item. And here we would, it's always done because we've filtered it. We would just say styles.done. And we can actually remove this entire CX library now, but keep it because it looks neat. So yeah, styles item and styles done. That's basically what we have. We can also remove this because we are not needing it anymore. And that's about it. Now I'm actually going to start styling. So first for the item, I would maybe add some padding. So again, we can make use of Tailwind within CSS itself using the apply property. So apply, and then we can add Tailwind classes right here. So I'm going to add a Tailwind class of py4. So this is going to add some padding in between individual items. Let me just verify that it is working. And it is. So it's added some padding on the top and bottom. I'm also going to add a border. But adding this border, it sort of makes an issue that individual, items in between cause double borders. So what I'm going to do here is add only border top or border bottom. And actually, actually adding border everywhere, but border on top is supposed to be 0. So this is essentially a class where border top width is 0 pixels. So you're never adding border top, but you're adding border everywhere else. Another thing that I would like to do is change the color of the background to something a bit more darker, so they blends with the background. So border gray 700, and also let's round it all of the borders. So again, there's another issue here where only we're actually bordering individual elements inside the list as well. We don't want that. We want to border only the top and the bottom. So now I'm gonna add rounded here. Instead, I'm gonna create a class called item first child. So this will affect only the first item. So in this, I'm going to apply border -t. And this is basically going to add that border that we want on the top only for the first item. And let's also add one item last child. So this is going to have rounded on the bottom. So we have only rounded edges on the bottom right here, as you can see, and going to add rounded t at the first child. So we have rounded edges at the top, only at the top for the first child. Awesome. Now we're actually going to work on the done value. So I'm going to apply these styles. I'm going to say that it has an opacity of 50%. So that's, grayed out right there. And also we have something called, we have strike through. Actually, I'm just going to Google that, search for that. So I want to search for text decoration and line through. So when we say line through, it's going to strike through our text. So let's just add that class as well, line through. So now, clicking on this, it's going to add that value. Clicking on by PS5, it's going to push it down. We can also add a cursor pointer to each individual item. So, we have like the neat little cursor. When we click on it, it goes down. When we click on buy bread, it goes down, and so on and so forth. So yeah, I guess we can add some more items right here or now we're buying a lot of stuff. Maybe, please subscribe, like, comment, and share. All right. Thanks for watching. I hope this helps. And I would also make sure to add the code on GitHub and I'll link it in the description below. And yeah, do let me know if this sort of content is useful to you and if I can change anything. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.